Welcome to the Psychology Undergrad.
Today is going to be intense. We are going into full academic lockdown mode.
That is absolutely right. This is a special edition of the show, specifically designed as an adolescence exam review session. We read through the listener feedback from our last deep dive into developmental psychology, and we heard you loud and clear.
The consensus was that while everyone appreciated the big picture concepts, a lot of you felt it wasn't comprehensive enough for the actual testing environment.
Yeah, people said we glossed over some of the nitty-gritty terminology.
The stuff that professors love to put on multiple choice questions.
Exactly. So, we are pivoting. This show is a rescue mission. We're going to grind through the study guide, term by term, chapter by chapter.
Our mission is simple.
Yeah.
We want you to walk into that exam hall and absolutely crush it.
No fluff today. We're treating this like a serious, high-stakes study group.
So we're going to define the terms, explain the underlying mechanisms, the why behind the what, and we are going to use mnemonics and pop culture connections to really lock this information into your long-term memory.
Right. We are covering the entire syllabus provided from Chapter 1 all the way through Chapter 13.
We're skipping Chapter 7 because it's not on the exam list.
But everything else is fair game. We have a lot of ground to cover, so we need to be efficient, but we also have to be thorough.
But before we even crack open the textbook to Chapter 1, we need to address a variable that, correlates more strongly with exam performance than almost anything else.
And it's the one every undergrad ignores.
Sleep.
Sleep. You cannot consolidate memory without it. I mean, if you're pulling all-nighters and then crashing on those scratchy, cheap dorm sheets, you are actively sabotaging your GPA.
You're literally working against yourself. You need a sleep environment that actually lets your brain recover and do its job.
Which is why we're partnering with Cozy Earth.
I know what you're thinking. When you're a student, bedding feels like a luxury you can't afford.
But think of this as a tool for your degree. Seriously. Cozy Earth's bamboo sheet set is so breathable, it's temperature regulating, and incredibly soft.
It just helps you fall asleep faster and stay asleep, which is when all that synaptic consolidation, all the stuff we're about to talk about, actually happens.
And we know sheets can be expensive for undergrads, so we hooked you up. You can get a massive 21% discount with the promo code PSYC101.
That's PSYC101.
Just go to the link in the show notes, get the discount, and treat your sleep as seriously as you treat your studying.
All right, let's do this. Let's get into the material. We are starting at the biological foundation. Chapter 1, biological transitions.
Okay, let's unpack the endocrine system. This is the big umbrella term we need to start with.
Right. So if you think of the body like a huge corporation, the nervous system is like the email server.
Instant fast messages.
Exactly. The endocrine system is more like the internal chemical mail service. It's slower, but the messages, they stick around longer. It's the body's network that produces and regulates hormones.
So a good mnemonic here is: endocrine emits envoy chemicals.
And those envoys are the hormones.
These are the chemical instructions.
Right. They're specialized substances secreted by glands. They get into the bloodstream and travel to specific target cells to tell them what to do.
So the mnemonic could be: hormones hurry through the blood.
I like that. And where do they come from? They come from glands.
Or hormone factory.
The hormone factories. The organs specifically designed to synthesize and pump out these chemicals.
So glands are generators. That works.
Now, specifically for puberty, we have to talk about the start button.
The GnRH neurons.
These are so crucial. GnRH stands for gonadotropin-releasing hormone neurons.
And for most of childhood, these neurons are just quiet. They're inhibited.
Right. Then, at the onset of puberty, for reasons we'll get into, they just start firing in these little pulses.
And that's the signal?
That's the signal. So you can remember, GnRH goes now for reproduction here.
Okay, so that firing of GnRH neurons, that kicks off a really specific chain of command.
The HPG axis.
This is definitely going to be a short answer question on your exam.
For sure. HPG stands for hypothalamus, pituitary, and gonads. You have to understand the hierarchy here to understand how puberty works.
So lay it out for us. Who's the boss in this system?
The hypothalamus is the boss. It's a part of the brain that's constantly monitoring the body's levels of everything, including hormones.
Okay, so it's the CEO.
It's the CEO. It monitors things, and then it sends a signal to the pituitary gland.
A good way to remember the order. Hypo is higher up than pituitary.
Correct. The pituitary gland is often called the master gland, which can be a little confusing because it takes orders from the hypothalamus.
So it's more like the general manager.
Perfect analogy.
Yeah.
It's the master because it sends orders out to the rest of the body. So maybe a mnemonic is pituitary pushes out orders.
And those orders go down to the factory floor.
Which are the gonads.
These are the sex glands, so tests in males, ovaries in females.
The reproduction centers. So gonads produce gametes. That's an easy way to link them.
Okay, now, to understand why puberty happens when it happens, you absolutely have to understand the concept of a set point.
The thermostat analogy is the most effective way to think about this. Your body has a preferred physiological balance for all sorts of things, right?
Temperature, blood sugar.
Exactly. And for hormones, that preferred balance is the set point. You can think of it like set point is a settled place.
So before puberty, the body's thermostat for sex hormones is set really, really low.
Super low. If the gonads produce even a tiny bit of sex hormone, the hypothalamus senses it and basically yells, "Whoa, it's too hot in here, shut it down."
But then during puberty, something changes.
The hypothalamus changes the dial. It turns that set point way up. All of a sudden, the body realizes it is way below this new target level.
So it has to ramp up production to catch up.
And that system of ramping up and shutting down is the feedback loop.
So when levels get too high, it sends a signal back up the chain to the hypothalamus and pituitary to turn off production for a bit.
Right. And if they dip below the set point, the system turns on again. It's a continuous cycle of self-regulation. So feedback fixes levels.
Okay, let's talk about the specific hormones the gonads release. We need to know androgens and estrogens.
And here is the classic exam trap question.
Right. Students always write that androgens are for boys and estrogens are for girls.
Which is incorrect. Both sexes have both hormones.
It's just the levels that differ, right? The ratio is different.
Exactly. Androgens are the class of hormones that includes testosterone. They're just present in much higher concentrations in males during puberty.
And they drive things like muscle growth, facial hair, voice changes.
Yep. So a good mnemonic.
Yep.
Androgens make Adam.
And then estrogens are the class that includes estradiol. They're much higher in females.
So estrogen for Eve. That was pretty straightforward.
Okay, so that's the engine. We have the HKG axis, the hormones. But what turns the key in the ignition? Why does the GnRH fire now and not 3 years ago?
We need to talk about the triggers.
Yeah.
The big one to know is a brain chemical called kisspeptin.
I love this name. It was discovered in Hershey, Pennsylvania.
So they named it after the Hershey kiss. You can think of it as the kiss that wakes up the sleeping beauty of puberty.
That's a great way to remember it. So kisspeptin kicks off puberty.
But kisspeptin doesn't just act alone. It is influenced by two other major factors you have to know: leptin and melatonin.
Okay, let's start with leptin.
This is where it gets really fascinating from an evolutionary perspective. Leptin is a protein that is produced by your fat cells.
And it stimulates kisspeptin.
Yes. So the mnemonic. Leptin means you have lipids or fat.
And if you think about it, that makes perfect sense.
Totally. Pregnancy and reproduction require a massive amount of caloric energy. The body does not want to start the process of puberty if you're starving.
So the brain waits for a signal that says, hey, we have enough fat reserves to support a potential pregnancy down the line.
That signal is leptin. And this directly explains why we often see puberty starting earlier in obese children. They hit that leptin threshold sooner.
And then on the other side of the coin, you have melatonin.
Which does the opposite. Melatonin regulates sleep, and it suppresses kisspeptin. It puts the brakes on.
So melatonin's for midnight.
Exactly. And since light exposure suppresses melatonin, there's this really interesting theory that our increased exposure to artificial light.
Screens, city lights.
Right. It might be lowering melatonin levels in kids, which in turn helps trigger puberty earlier because it's removing that brake on kisspeptin.
Wow. Okay, let's move to the physical changes themselves. First on the list is adrenarche.
This is an interesting one because it happens before the visible signs of puberty that we usually think of. It's usually around age 6 to 9.
And it's the maturation of the adrenal glands.
Which causes the beginnings of body odor and, interestingly, the very first feelings of sexual attraction.
Before anything else is really happening.
Right. So adrenarche is adrenal awakening.
And since we are talking about the adrenal glands, we have to mention cortisol.
The stress hormone. Research shows that adolescence is a period of heightened vulnerability to stress.
The cortisol response is just more sensitive, more reactive.
Which means things that might not stress out an adult or a young child can cause a massive cortisol spike in a teenager. So cortisol causes concentration on danger.
Then, of course, we hit the big one. The adolescent growth spurt.
The dramatic increase in height and weight. The giant stretch, as the outline says.
And an important exam note here. This happens about 2 years earlier for girls than for boys.
Right. This is why in, 7th grade, The girls are often taller than all the boys.
So what stops the growth? I mean, why don't we just keep growing?
That would be the epiphysis.
Which is the end of the long bones in your arms and legs.
Exactly. At the end of puberty, the epiphysis closes or hardens, and that's it. You aren't getting any taller. So epiphysis is the end.
At the same time, we see the development of the secondary sex characteristics.
These are the visible signs that distinguish the sexes, but aren't directly involved in reproduction.
So things like breasts, facial hair, pubic hair, voice changes.
Right, so the mnemonic could be secondary as surface signs. And doctors actually track this development using the Tanner stages.
The puberty scorecard.
That's a perfect way to put it. It's a scale from 1 to 5 describing the physical development of these characteristics. Tanner tracks teen growth.
And for girls, a major milestone in this process is menarche.
The first menstrual period, so menarche is menstruation arriving.
But looking at this from a historical perspective, we see the secular trend.
This connects right back to our discussion about leptin and nutrition.
Right. The secular trend is the historical tendency for puberty, specifically menarche, to start earlier and earlier over the last 2 centuries.
Yeah, in the mid-1800s, the average age of menarche was around 17.
Wow.
Yeah, and now it's closer to 12. So secular is a shift over centuries, and it's mostly due to better nutrition, sanitation, and healthcare.
Okay, wrapping up Chapter 1, we need to quickly touch on 2 research methods: cross-sectional study versus longitudinal study.
A cross-sectional study compares different groups at one single point in time.
It's a snapshot. Like you take a photo of a freshman, a sophomore, and a junior all on the same day and compare them.
Exactly. So cross-section is a cut of time.
And longitudinal.
That's the lifelong movie. A longitudinal study follows the same group of people over a long period.
So you interview the freshmen, then you wait a year and interview them again as sophomores and so on.
Right. So longitudinal is long-term. It's more powerful, but way more expensive and time-consuming.
And one last brain concept for this chapter: plasticity.
This is a huge one. It's the brain's malleability, its ability to change and reorganize in response to experience.
And adolescence is a second major period of heightened plasticity.
Almost as potent as the first 3 years of life. This is why learning a language or a musical instrument is, relatively easier for a teen than a 40-year-old. The brain is just more pliable. So plasticity is pliable.
Boom. Chapter 1 down. Let's move to Chapter 2. Cognitive transitions. The mind.
Okay, so this is where the teenager starts to literally think differently. The foundational concept here is metacognition.
Thinking about thinking.
Right. Metacognition is mind monitoring. It's the ability to step outside your own head and analyze your thought processes.
Which sounds like a superpower, and it is, but it has this really interesting side effect.
It leads directly to adolescent egocentrism.
Because if I can think about my own thoughts, I naturally assume that everyone else is thinking about my thoughts too.
Exactly. The mnemonic is easy. Egocentrism is easy. Everything is about me. And this manifests in 2 very specific ways that always show up on exams.
First is the imaginary audience.
This is that intense belief that everyone is watching and judging you. You get a pimple, and you're convinced it's the only thing anyone in the entire school can see.
Mnemonic. Imaginary audience means I am always watched.
And the second one is the personal fable.
This is the belief that your experiences are completely unique and that you're somehow invincible.
Right. No one has ever been in love like this before, or I can text and drive, that won't happen to me. It's a sense of uniqueness that can be really dangerous. So personal fable is personal fantasy.
Okay, let's talk theory. We have the cognitive developmental view, which is basically Piaget.
This view argues that cognitive growth happens in distinct qualitative stages, like climbing a staircase. So cognitive development is a distinct display.
And for adolescents, the key stage, the top of the staircase, is formal operations.
The final stage. This is when abstract, logical reasoning comes online. It's if-then thinking.
The ability to think about hypothetical situations, not just what's concretely in front of you.
Exactly. So formal is flexible and abstract.
Now you can contrast that with the information processing perspective.
This view is totally different. It sees the brain as being like a computer.
So it's not about stages, it's about improvements in the components.
Right, like processing speed, attention, and memory capacity.
Yeah.
So information processing is like an Intel processor getting an upgrade.
And within this perspective, we have things like selective attention and divided attention.
Selective attention is the ability to focus on one thing and tune out distractions.
So studying for this exam while your roommate is playing a video game?
That's the perfect example. Selective singles out one thing.
And divided attention.
That's multitasking. Trying to pay attention to 2 sets of stimuli at once. Adolescents get better at it, but there's always a cost to performance.
So, divided is double focus.
Then we have memory. We need to distinguish working memory from long-term memory.
Working memory is like the mental scratch pad, right? Holding information briefly while you solve a problem.
Exactly. It's the brain's RAM. So working is for work happening now.
And long-term memory is the hard drive?
The lifetime storage of facts, experiences, and knowledge.
And a really cool concept related to this is the reminiscence bump.
I love this one. It's the finding that if you ask older adults to recall memories from their life, they disproportionately remember events from adolescence and young adulthood.
Why is that?
Because the brain is chemically primed during that time, with all hormones and neurotransmitters firing, to encode those memories very deeply, especially the emotional ones. So reminiscence bump is a really bright memory.
Okay, let's look at the physical brain, the hardware. We have fMRI versus DTI.
These are imaging techniques. An fMRI, or functional MRI, measures blood flow and oxygen. It shows which parts of the brain are active. It shows function.
And DTI?
DTI, or diffusion tensor imaging, measures the diffusion of water in brain tissue. It's a way of mapping out the connections and wiring, the white matter.
So fMRI shows function, DTI shows details of wiring.
Perfect. And the building blocks of all this are neurons and the synapse.
Neurons are the messenger cells. The synapse is the tiny gap between them where the chemical signal has to jump. So synapse is a space.
And during adolescence, the brain remodels itself through two major processes, synaptic pruning and myelination.
Let's start with synaptic pruning. This is the use it or lose it principle.
Exactly. The brain overproduces connections in childhood and then eliminates the ones that aren't being used to make the whole system more efficient.
It's like a gardener cutting back a rose bush so the remaining flowers can bloom bigger and stronger.
That's a great analogy. So pruning is purging waste.
And myelination.
This is the process of coating the brain circuits, the axons, in a fatty substance called myelin. It's the white matter.
And it acts like insulation on an electrical wire.
It does. It makes the signal travel much, much faster, up to 100 times faster. So myelin makes it move fast.
And these processes happen at different rates in different parts of the brain, which leads to the dual systems model.
This is probably the most important concept in the chapter. It's the brake and the gas theory of the teenage brain.
Okay, so what's the gas pedal?
The limbic system. This is the emotional, reward-seeking part of the brain. It matures early, like by early adolescence. It's fully developed and screaming for novelty and excitement.
So limbic is for lust and love and all those intense feelings.
And the brake pedal is the prefrontal cortex.
The brain's CEO, the part that handles planning, impulse control, and thinking about long-term consequences.
And this part of the brain doesn't finish myelinating until your mid-20s. So the mnemonic is simple. Prefrontal is the planner.
So you've got a Ferrari engine with the limbic system, but you've got bicycle brakes with the prefrontal cortex.
That's the maturational imbalance. And it explains so much about adolescent risk-taking.
And all of that planning and self-regulation is what we call executive function.
Right. And it's just inconsistent in teens. So executive executes plans.
Okay, what about the brain chemicals? We have to know dopamine and serotonin.
Dopamine is the reward chemical, the ooh, I want that feeling. And the adolescent brain is hypersensitive to its effects, especially in the presence of peers. Dopamine is for desire.
And serotonin.
That's more of a mood stabilizer. It's involved in things like mood, sleep, and appetite. So serotonin is for stability.
Shifting gears a bit to social cognition, we have Vygotsky's concept.
You're right, the zone of proximal development.
This is that sweet spot of learning. It's a task that's just a little too hard for you to do on your own, but you can do it with help.
That's where the most effective learning happens. So zone is for zenith of learning.
And the help that you get is called scaffolding.
Yes. It's the support from a teacher or a peer, like training wheels on a bike, that is gradually removed as you get better. Scaffolding supports students.
We also develop a more sophisticated theory of mind.
This is the crucial understanding that other people have beliefs, knowledge, and intentions that are different from your own.
It's what allows you to empathize, but it's also what allows you to lie effectively.
True. So theory of mind is their mind.
And finally, for Chapter 2, behavioral decision theory.
This really challenges the idea that teens are just irrational and crazy.
It says that their risk-taking is actually a calculated cost-benefit analysis.
Exactly. The difference is that teens just weigh the potential social rewards like looking cool, peer acceptance, the thrill much, much more heavily than adults do, and they downplay the potential risks.
Sure.
So behavioral decision is a balanced dealing.
All right, Chapter 3, Social transitions. This is all about how society views and treats the adolescent.
Right. The key term here is social redefinition.
This is the process through which an individual's position or status is redefined by society, a status rebirth.
Yeah, it's the point when the community formally or informally says, you are no longer a child. Mnemonic. Social redefinition is a status rebirth.
This usually happens around the age of majority.
Which is just the legal age of adulthood. In the U.S., that's typically 18, majority and mature age.
Now, a really important theoretical group you need to know, the inventionists.
They're historians and sociologists who argue that adolescence, as we know it, is a social creation.
That it was invented.
Right, not purely a biological stage, but something created by industrialization, mandatory schooling, and child labor laws. So inventionists believe we invented it.
And you can see this in the words we use. For example, teenager versus youth.
Totally different connotations. Yeah. The word teenager came about in the 1950s, and it implies a frivolous, consumer-driven image.
Buying records and lipstick, like the outline says.
Yeah. So teenager is trendy, whereas the term youth usually refers to older individuals, maybe 18 to 22, the college age, and it has a more serious connotation of activism or study. So youth is young adult.
In many cultures, this social transition is marked by an initiation ceremony.
A formal ritual, like a quinceañera, a bar mitzvah, or a confirmation. Mnemonic. Initiation is an induction.
But sometimes being a certain age gets you in trouble for a status offense.
An act that is only considered illegal because of your age.
Truancy or running away or underage drinking.
Exactly. If a 25-year-old skips work, it's not a crime. But if a 15-year-old skips school, it is. So status is about seniority.
And we study these groups of people as cohorts.
Just a group of people born during the same historical era. Your graduating class is a cohort. Gen Z is a cohort. So cohorts are contemporaries.
But let's talk about the pace of this transition. Continuous versus discontinuous transitions.
A continuous transition is gradual and smooth. Think of a traditional farming culture.
The kid starts helping out with small chores at age 5, and by the time they're an adult, they've been doing the job for a decade. They're fully prepared.
Right. Continuous is constant and slow.
Whereas we live in a society with discontinuous transitions.
It's abrupt. You are a student, and then boom, you graduate, and you're expected to find a job and be a fully functioning adult with very little direct experience.
It's like jumping off a diving board into the deep end.
Yep. Discontinuous is a dramatic drop.
And finally, for this chapter, collective efficacy.
This is a community-level variable. It's the extent to which neighbors trust each other and are willing to intervene for the common good, like supervising the community's youth.
So if kids are vandalizing a park in a high collective efficacy neighborhood, another parent would step in and say something.
Exactly. And high collective efficacy is strongly linked to lower rates of delinquency. So collective is a community bond.
Okay, moving on. Chapter 4. Families.
A huge topic. The dynamics really shift during adolescence.
It starts with the self-fulfilling prophecy.
This is a big one for parent-teen conflict. If parents expect their teen to be difficult and rebellious,
they start acting more strict and suspicious.
Which the teen resents, so they act out and rebel.
And then the parents say, "See, I told you so."
It's a vicious cycle. Self-fulfilling is a sure fate.
This fits into the broader idea of family systems theory.
This theory views the family as an interconnected system, like a mobile hanging from the ceiling.
If you move one piece, the adolescent going through all these biological and cognitive changes, the whole thing shapes and has to find a new balance.
Right. You can't just look at the teen in isolation. So systems means shared links.
In many collectivist cultures, we see a strong value of familism.
This is the belief that the needs of the family as a whole should take precedence over the needs of any single individual. Familism is family first.
But this can sometimes cause generational dissonance.
This is a common source of conflict in immigrant families. The parents may be holding on to the traditional values of their home culture,
while the teen who's growing up in America is acculturating much faster and wants more independence.
That gap in values is the dissonance. So dissonance is disagreement.
Okay, the big one from this chapter. Baumrien's 4 parenting styles. This is guaranteed to be on the exam.
Absolutely. First up, the gold standard, authoritative parents.
These parents are both warm and firm. They have rules and expectations, but they explain them. They're responsive, and they encourage autonomy within limits.
The mnemonic here is to focus on the end of the word. Authoritative is talkative and involved.
Okay, that's good. Now, contrast that with authoritarian parents.
These are the because I said so parents. They're very high on demand, but very low on warmth. It's rigid, controlling, and often punitive. For this one, the mnemonic is authoritarian is insistent on absolute rules.
Then you have indulgent parents.
This is the best friend parent. They're very warm and responsive, but they have no rules or demands. They're more concerned with the kid liking them.
So indulgent is incredibly easy.
And finally, the style with the worst outcomes across the board. Indifferent parents.
They're neglectful. They are neither warm nor demanding. They're just checked out, uninvolved.
Yeah. Indifferent is ignoring.
Okay, let's look at the nature versus nurture side of things with behavioral genetics.
This field tries to untangle the influence of genes and environment on development. Behavioral genetics is biology plus growth.
And a key distinction they make is between shared versus non-shared environments.
Right. The shared environment is what siblings have in common. The same house, the same parents, living in poverty.
And the non-shared environment is what is unique to each sibling, having different friends, different teachers, or being treated differently by their parents.
And surprisingly, research shows that the non-shared environment has a much bigger impact on shaping personality differences. So, shared is same, non-shared is new or unique.
Okay, there are two important models for how genes and the environment interact. First, the diathesis stress model.
This is the gun and trigger model. The diathesis is a pre-existing vulnerability, usually genetic. That's the loaded gun.
And the stress from the environment is what pulls the trigger, leading to a problem like depression.
Right. If you have the gene but no stress, you're likely fine. You need both. So diathesis is design. Stress is the spark.
But a newer model is the differential susceptibility theory.
This is the orchid and dandelion theory. It suggests that some people, dandelions, are resilient and will do okay in almost any environment.
But other people, orchids, are much more sensitive.
Exactly. They will wither in a bad environment, but in a really good, supportive environment, they will absolutely flourish, even more so than the dandelions. So differential means different reactions.
And the last term for this chapter, psychological control.
This is a really toxic form of parenting. It's not about setting rules. It's about being intrusive and manipulating the teen's emotions.
Things like guilt trips, withdrawing love, making the child feel responsible for the parent's happiness.
Yes. And it's strongly linked to internalizing problems like anxiety and depression. So psychological is pulling strings.
Okay, chapter 5, peer groups. The big shift from parents to friends.
And it really starts with the structure of modern schools, with age grading.
Just grouping students by age, putting all the 15-year-olds together in one grade.
And it's important to remember this is a pretty recent invention of industrialization, designed to process students efficiently. Age grading is age grouping.
The anthropologist Margaret Mead talked about co-figurative cultures.
This is a culture where socialization happens through both adults and peers. It's basically modern society where teens learn a lot from each other, especially about things like technology. So co-figurative is co-learning.
Now, you have to know the difference between cliques and crowds.
Super important. Cliques are small, tight-knit groups of friends, maybe 2 to 12 people. They're defined by friendship and social interaction. They're for learning social skills.
So cliques are close.
And crowds are different. They are large, reputation-based labels.
Jocks, brains, druggies, preps.
Exactly. You don't necessarily hang out with everyone in your crowd, but it's how you are categorized. It's for identity placement in the social structure of the school. Crowds are categories.
And we often use our crowd as a reference group.
The group you compare yourself to evaluate your own attitudes and behaviors. Reference is a ruler.
Now, sometimes well-intentioned interventions with peer groups can go wrong.
Right. We see iatrogenic effects.
Which means the treatment or intervention actually causes unintended harm.
The classic example is putting a group of delinquent teens together for group therapy. They can end up teaching each other bad habits and antisocial skills. It's called deviancy training.
So iatrogenic increases problems.
Okay, let's talk popularity. There are two kinds. Sociometric versus perceived.
Sociometric popularity is just how much you are liked by your peers. It's based on kindness, social skills, being trustworthy.
Right. Sociometric is sweetness.
But perceived popularity is about status and power.
These are the cool kids who might not actually be well-liked. Their status often comes from being dominant, aggressive, and influential.
So perceived is prestige.
Speaking of aggression, we have hostile attributional bias. This is the tendency to interpret ambiguous actions by others as being deliberately hostile.
So someone bumps into you in the hallway by accident?
And you immediately assume they did it on purpose to disrespect you, and you're ready to fight. So hostile is hitting back early.
And then there's relational aggression.
This is a more covert, indirect form of aggression, more common among girls. It's harming someone through gossip, social exclusion, or ruining their reputation.
The entire plot of the movie Mean Girls.
Exactly. Relational ruins reputations.
And the modern version of this is cyberbullying.
Harassment, humiliation, and intimidation that happens through digital means, social media, texts, emails. So cyber is cell phone bullying.
Phew. Okay, chapter 6, schools.
The context where all of this peer stuff plays out.
Let's start with the structure. The comprehensive high school.
This is the classic American shopping mall high school that tries to be everything for everyone.
It has college prep tracks, vocational tracks, and general education all under one roof.
Yep, comprehensive is complete.
But one of the problems that can arise is social promotion.
This is the policy of moving kids to the next grade level, regardless of whether they've actually learned the material, just to keep them with their age group. So social is shoving them along.
A reaction against that was standards-based reform.
Things like No Child Left Behind. The idea of creating benchmarks and standardized tests to ensure students are actually learning. Standards are stakes.
We've also seen the rise of charter schools.
These are schools that receive public funding but are autonomous and can design their own curriculum and policies. Charter is choice.
Now, a controversial practice within schools is tracking.
This is separating students into different ability groups like honors, academic, and remedial tracks.
And the research shows it can really increase inequality because students in the lower tracks get poorer quality instruction, and it's very hard to move up.
Right. Tracking is tiering.
For students with special needs, we have the policy of mainstreaming.
This is integrating students with disabilities into regular classrooms whenever possible. Mainstreaming is mixing.
Okay, a huge psychological concept here. The big fish little pond effect.
This is so important for self-esteem. The research shows it is actually better for your academic self-concept to be a top student in a less competitive school
Than to be an average student in an elite, highly competitive school.
Right. It feels better to be a big fish in a little pond.
A big concern, especially in middle school, is student engagement.
Just being psychologically checked in and committed to learning, it often drops dramatically in middle school because the school environment doesn't match the teen's growing need for autonomy and respect. So engagement is energy.
In terms of discipline, many schools adopted zero-tolerance policies.
Harsh automatic punishments, often suspension or expulsion, for the first infraction of a rule, usually regarding weapons or drugs.
And these often backfire, right? They can criminalize students for minor issues and increase the dropout rate.
They do. Zero is zilch mercy.
And finally, a positive concept, social capital.
This is the idea that there is a kind of wealth found in relationships and social networks. The support and connections you get from family, friends, and community can be a huge asset. Social is support wealth.
Okay, we're skipping chapter 7, jumping to chapter 8, identity.
This is Erikson's core crisis of adolescence, finding out who you are.
And it starts with imagining your possible selves.
Who you could become, the ideal self you hope to be, and the feared self you want to avoid. So, possible is potential.
And this requires having a future orientation.
The ability to think about the long-term consequences of your decisions. This develops throughout adolescence. Future is forecasting.
We also need to distinguish self-conceptions and self-esteem.
Your self-conceptions are the specific traits and attributes you see in yourself. Your mental ID card. I am funny. I am shy. I am athletic.
So conception is a characterization.
And your self-esteem is how you feel about those traits. It's your overall sense of self-worth. It's your evaluation. So esteem is evaluation.
And this all plays into Erikson's framework. The core crisis is identity versus identity diffusion.
The challenge is to forge a coherent, stable sense of self. The opposite of that is identity diffusion, which is feeling scattered, incomplete, and disconnected. Diffusion is disconnected.
And to solve this crisis in a healthy way, you ideally need a psychosocial moratorium.
This is a time out from adult responsibilities to explore different roles and identities. College is often seen as a moratorium. So moratorium is a moment of exploration.
But some people skip the exploration phase. That's identity foreclosure.
This is when you commit to an identity, a career, a set of values, without ever really exploring the alternatives. Usually it's just adopting the identity your parents want for you. Foreclosure is fast-forwarding.
And another unhealthy outcome is a negative identity.
This is when you define yourself by being the opposite of what is expected or valued. You become the black sheep just to be noticed or to spite your parents. So negatives is naughty.
The cultural context is huge here. Let's talk about ethnic socialization.
This is the process through which parents teach their children about their culture, their heritage, and prepare them to deal with racism and prejudice. Ethnic is education on roots.
And this leads to a really interesting finding called the immigrant paradox.
This is the finding that recent immigrants often have better mental health, academic performance, and lower rates of delinquency than their peers from the same ethnic group who have been in the country longer.
That is counterintuitive.
It is. The reasons are complex, but it might relate to stronger family ties and a more optimistic outlook. So, immigrant is impressively strong.
Finally, for this chapter, gender. Gender identity versus sexual orientation.
You have to know the difference. Gender identity is your internal psychological sense of yourself as male, female, transgender, or non-binary. Gender identity is genuine self.
And sexual orientation is about who you are physically and romantically attracted to.
Exactly. It's external.
Right.
Sexual orientation is someone outside you.
We also have the gender intensification hypothesis.
This is the idea that the pressure from society, peers, and parents to conform to traditional masculine and feminine roles increases dramatically during early adolescence. So intensification is increased pressure.
Chapter 9, autonomy, developing independence.
But it's not just one thing. There are 3 types you need to know.
First, emotional autonomy.
This is about de-idealizing your parents, realizing they're just flawed people, not all-knowing gods. It's not needing them for every little emotional boost or crisis. So, emotional is emancipation from need.
Second is behavioral autonomy.
This is the ability to make your own decisions and follow through with them. It's about self-governance. Behavioral is being the boss.
And third is cognitive autonomy.
This is about developing your own set of values, beliefs, and principles that are separate from your parents or your friends. Cognitive is convictions.
And this whole process of becoming a separate, self-governing individual is called individuation.
And it's important to remember, it's not about cutting off your parents. It's about redefining the relationship into a more mature, equal one. So individuation is I-making.
In the moral realm, we sometimes see moral disengagement.
This is a set of psychological strategies people use to rationalize their bad behavior and turn off their moral compass.
Things like blaming the victim or saying everyone else did it.
Exactly. It wasn't my fault. Disengagement is dropping rules.
The positive side of this is civic engagement.
Just being involved in your community, volunteering, political activism, things like that. Civic is community care.
And finally, religiosity versus spirituality.
An important distinction. Religiosity usually refers to involvement in institutional worship and organized religion.
Following the doctrines.
Right. Spirituality is more about a personal quest for meaning, and it may or may not happen inside a formal religion. As teens develop cognitive autonomy, many become less religious, but more spiritual.
So religiosity is ritual, spirituality is searching.
Chapter 10. Intimacy. Not just sex, but emotional closeness.
Right. It starts with platonic relationships.
These are just non-sexual friendships, which are incredibly important for development. Platonic is purely friendly.
And our ability to form these close bonds is shaped by our internal working model.
This is a concept from John Bowlby's attachment theory. It's the blueprint or template for relationships that we form in infancy based on our interactions with our primary caregiver.
So if you had a secure attachment as a baby, you go into relationships expecting them to be secure and trustworthy.
Exactly. Working model is a way to mate or relate to others.
But some people develop rejection sensitivity.
This is being thin-skinned in social situations, especially romantic ones. You are hyper-vigilant for signs of rejection and tend to overreact to them. Rejection sensitivity is really scared.
And in friendships, we need to watch out for co-rumination.
This is when friends spend way too much time obsessively discussing and rehashing their problems.
It can feel like it brings you closer.
It does, but the research shows it actually increases both friends' symptoms of depression and anxiety because you just get stuck in a negative spiral together. Co-rumination is constant review.
But in general, what you really need is social support.
The emotional, instrumental, and informational support you get from your social network. It's the safety net. So, support is safety.
Okay, chapter 11. Sexuality.
Let's start with autoerotic behavior.
This just refers to sexual behavior that is experienced alone, like fantasy or masturbation. Auto is alone.
Now, in terms of education, The evidence is clear that comprehensive sex ed is the most effective approach.
This is education that teaches about abstinence, but also about contraception, safe sex, and refusal skills.
Right. It's been proven much more effective at reducing teen pregnancy and STIs than abstinence-only education. Comprehensive is complete.
Speaking of contraception, a huge development is LARC.
Stands for long-acting reversible contraception. These are things like IUDs or hormonal implants.
The set it and forget it methods.
Exactly. They're highly effective because they remove the potential for user error. LARC is lastingly active.
We also have STD, STI.
Sexually transmitted disease or sexually transmitted infection. It's important for students to know the risks. STD is sex-transmitted disease.
And a legal term you might need to know is judicial bypass.
This is a legal mechanism in some states that allows a minor to get an abortion without parental consent or notification by getting approval from a judge. Judicial is judge-approved.
All right, Chapter 12, Achievement. Why do some students succeed and others struggle?
And it's not just about IQ. We need to look at non-cognitive factors.
These are things like grit, perseverance, conscientiousness, and self-control.
They are often better predictors of academic and life success than raw intelligence. So, non-cognitive is not smarts.
Then you have underachievers.
These are students whose grades are significantly lower than what you would expect based on their intellectual ability or standardized test scores. Under is underperforming.
A lot of this boils down to motivation. We have mastery versus performance motivation.
Mastery motivation is intrinsic. You are learning because you genuinely want to understand and master the material. Mastery is mastering.
And performance motivation is extrinsic. You're learning to get the good grade, the reward, or to look smart to others. Performance is prizes.
If a student with performance motivation fails repeatedly, they might develop learned helplessness.
This is when you give up because you come to believe that failure is inevitable and your efforts don't matter.
And you stop trying even when you could succeed.
Yeah.
It's a really dangerous mindset. Helplessness is hopelessness.
The antidote to this is a growth mindset.
This is a concept from Carol Dweck. It's the belief that intelligence is not a fixed trait, but a muscle that can be grown with effort and practice.
The power of saying, I can't do it yet.
Exactly. Growth is growing.
Final chapter. Chapter 13, Psychosocial Problems.
So we categorize problems into two broad bins.
Externalizing versus internalizing.
Internalizing problems are when you turn distress inward. This includes things like depression, anxiety, and eating disorders. Internal is inward.
And externalizing problems are when you turn distress outward. Aggression, delinquency, substance abuse. External is exit, and it's very common to have both at the same time, which is called comorbid.
Double trouble. Having both anxiety and conduct problems, for instance. Comorbid is co-occurring.
A specific diagnosis for externalizing problems is conduct disorder.
This is a persistent pattern of behavior that violates the basic rights of others and major societal norms. Things like aggression, theft, and deceitfulness. Conduct is criminal-like.
And a subset of kids with conduct disorder have callous, unemotional traits.
This is a really concerning personality profile characterized by a lack of empathy, a lack of guilt, and a cold demeanor. It's a risk factor for adult psychopathy. Callous is cold.
Now, in delinquency research, we distinguish between two types of offenders. Life course persistent versus adolescence limited.
The life course persistent offenders start their antisocial behavior in childhood and continue it into adulthood. They are lifelong criminals. Life course is lifelong.
And adolescence limited offenders.
This is the much larger group. These are the normal rebels who get into some trouble during their teen years, but stop as they transition into adulthood. This connects right back to that dual systems model. Once the prefrontal cortex matures, the offending stops. Limited is temporary.
A very serious topic next, NSSI.
Non-suicidal self-injury. This includes behaviors like cutting, burning, or scratching oneself.
And the key here is that the intent is not to commit suicide.
Right. It's most often used as a way to regulate intense, painful emotions, to get relief or feel a sense of control. NSSI is non-suicidal.
And finally, the goal for everyone who faces these challenges. Resilience.
The ability to bounce back from adversity and thrive despite facing significant stress or trauma. Resilience is rebounding.
And that is the list. We did it. We made it through.
That is the comprehensive review, every term on the guide.
And remember, understanding these terms isn't just about passing an exam. It's about understanding the human experience of growing up, why we felt the way we did, why our friends acted the way they did.
Absolutely. And here's a provocative thought to leave you with, tie it all together. Consider the inventionists we discussed back in Chapter 3.
The idea that adolescence is a social creation.
Right. If that's true, does that mean that the storm and stress of biology or the adolescence-limited offending we just talked about are not biological inevitabilities?
Whoa, so are there just side effects of how we structure our society, our schools, our laws?
If we change those structures, if we had more continuous transitions, for example, would adolescence as we know it, with all its associated problems, just disappear?
Something to think about after the exam.
For sure.
Good luck on the exam. You've got this.
You really do. Go crush it.
And don't forget to grab those sheets. Check the shoulders. See you next time on the Psychology Undergrad.